Welcome to a new episode of the brand called You. In every episode, we bring some really, really interesting people. And today we have Kavita Bagga. Kavita, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Thank you for having me.
Kavita is, and in her own words, a corporate rat turned farm rodent, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. She's from Hindu College, IMT Ghaziabad. Had an amazing career with JWT, Hindustan Unilever, National Geographic, Pepsi Co, Times of India. Then she worked for an organization which is SABMiller. After that, she started on her own, which is a company called Kara Organics. Kavita, you worked for several companies before SABMiller. Tell us about some of your highlights.
You know, while my background would tell you that I really worked for too many companies, it was actually not too many companies. It was different verticals which were part of the same company. And I really started out, and while I was actually sort of retrospecting and thinking where all have I worked and what have I gathered, I realized that everywhere that I've worked has been sort of a startup on its own, but within a larger hemisphere of a larger company, which is so good because while every company, a small setup within a larger setup that I worked with, was all about passionate people and trying to do things differently or trying to be innovative and think out of the box and add value to your customer or the client. We were still part of a much larger company which really guided us with a lot of value system and it was like a cushioning thing for the smaller setup, so that if we made errors there was a fallback option as well. So I started my career with Fulcrum, which is now called Mindshare. And Fulcrum was part of the erstwhile HTA, Hindustan Thompson Associate. Yep. And it was the first time that an agency set up an agency on record for a client, and as bigger client as Hindustan Unilever. And we were supposed to consolidate all their media buying and planning and basically get economy of scale and optimize their spends and do their entire media buying and planning for Hindustan Unilever. We started out as a team of about 4 people with 4 desktop computers and fax machines, because that was the time when we still send ROs to media channels through faxes, right? Fulcrum was an amazing time. I think it really makes a lot of difference on where you really started your career, because that really starts to instill values that stay with you for a much longer time. And I think Fulcrum, not only did it tell me where my strengths and weaknesses really were as an individual, because I was still too young as a professional to really see where my skill sets were. But things like, am I too short-tempered? Am I too impatient? Am I a good listener or a bad listener? How good am I at taking instructions? Am I compliant, not compliant? Am I a revolutionary? Those kind of things, the little things about you start to happen, which, college and school really doesn't tell you that much. So Fulcrum was a very interesting stint. I spent about 3 years at Fulcrum, and then because I was interacting very closely with our client, which is Hindustan Unilever, I was asked, in fact almost invited by them to come and join them on a secondment for a year. So I joined HUL for about a year and sat in the HUL office at Fort in Bombay and worked very closely with the brand managers, which is where I realized that while media buying and media planning was very interesting and it made you familiar with the brand, it really wasn't the entire brand management on its own. There was so much more that really goes into brand building and brand management, things like packaging, dealing with distributors, creating promotions, creating IPR properties, dealing with consumers, supply chain, so there's a whole gamut around a brand which one was not familiar with as just a media buyer or a planner. So I said, after a year of that secondment coming to an end, I said, let me get back to something which gets me a little more closer to strategy and brand building. So I requested for a change to client servicing. And then I moved within HTA to client servicing. where I worked on brands which were still very nascent. The categories were very nascent, like Kellogg's, and that was at a time where Indians felt that a heavy breakfast is a nutritious breakfast.
Yep.
Or eating dry goods or a cereal in the morning was completely unheard of and thought as something that only the privileged had on their dining table, whereas everybody was very happy eating aloo parathas and puri alus, So there was a whole lot of effort that went into really trying to educate consumers through our media communication and marketing strategies on why nutrition is important than volume. And heavy needn't mean healthy. And then I also worked on brands like Horlicks, which again, in a country where we have milk in abundance, feeding your child powder, water, drink was not seen as something. It was almost like sacrilege. If I'm not going to give my child milk, I'm a bad mother. So again, there I learned a lot about building the category and growing the brand alongside, of course, my brand managers and category heads. Post JWT, I had a short stint with National Geographic, which I think has been one of my most, so to say, unproductive 9 months at a personal level. One, because it was a very short stint, and two, at a personal level, I was going through some chaos in my life. I was married very young, and I was going through a messy divorce. So I decided to take a break, because I felt that if I am not being able to fully give myself to a certain job, then not only am I doing gross injustice to myself, but I think it is also using up an opportunity for somebody else who could perform better, in that position. So I took a break and I pulled back a little, and I decided to jump back into being the real me and and understand how strong am I to deal with setbacks. And really embrace myself, and to come back into the real world again and not have any emotional turbulences, keeping me away from things that I could really deliver on. And that little break that I took for about 7 to 8 months was fantastic. Sometimes you say, things happen for good. I think that's something which was happened for a very good reason, because I learned a lot during that 7 months, which stood by me very strongly. In fact, still does. Yep. So I spent those 7 months. I did a lot of travel. I did 2 courses of Vipassana, the longest courses of 13 days, which is about absolute mourn and there's no talking. And I took to yoga. I got back into shape, I went to the gym and I worked on myself, and then I just said, okay, enough of all this well-being, and then I just went off to Goa and hung out with the hippies for about 2 months till my father came looking for me and got me back to Delhi and said, okay, party over, so that was really good. And then I came back, and fortunately, while I had worked with JWT, I had interacted with the people from Pepsi, because Pepsi used to be our biggest client. And I happened to speak with them, and they said that in the marketing team there was a vacancy, and I could probably come and chat with Vibha and Rajiv, who was the MD then. Yep. So I went to Pepsi, and of course I got interviewed, and fortunately I was hired at Pepsi. And Pepsi for me has been my most defining period in my career, because I think it is a fantastic organization to work with, and unlike what you see today, the time that I was at Pepsi and in that company, I think there were just so many stars for you to look up to.
Yes.
And it is so important to work for people that you can look up to, because I think people don't work for organizations, they work for individuals.
Correct.
And at a younger age, when you are lucky to have somebody who can guide you and mentor you and bring out the right talent in you and show you really where your aptitude lies, and push you to push the boundaries as well. I think that's very important, because eventually you do end up becoming leaders, and you do end up becoming coaches to youngsters. And unless you've had a good leader yourself, you really don't know who to emulate. So Pepsi was very good, and I had a boss who was, of course, gender diversity was a bit of a joke to him. So he said, okay, I've been given this woman, to work in my team, and what can a woman do? She doesn't play cricket, and I can't discuss, whatever, this, that with her, and she's going to be worried about getting a tan and this and that. So he decided to man me up a little. And he said that I don't want to see you in the office. I want you to be in the field 25 days a month. And it doesn't have to be Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore. You have to go to Rajamundry, Kakinada, Gondalgaon, and places which are completely unheard of. Well, fortunately for me and surprisingly for him, I was quite excited.
Amazing.
Because that meant that I could travel more on company cost, and really get to meet more and more people. So I did that, and I think that was amazing, because that is where I learned that you really can't build a brand sitting in an air-conditioned office. And unless you and you research, you have research agencies which will all get you empirical data, but what you can really understand about your consumer is by actually interacting with that consumer. So I have spent days in the Dharavi slum, where we were trying to launch sliced Tetra Pak, or packaged drinking water, Aquafina, and these were people who were drinking out of, sewage water or, taps, and trying to get these people, or for that matter in Gujarat, at that time you got those little 25 paisa polythene packets of water, which nobody had really had an idea what the source was. So talking to people and trying to educate them on the hygiene levels of water, and getting them to pay money for water, which is a very easily available commodity so far, I'm not sure if it will be in future, was very challenging, but very exciting. And then also telling people that, beverages are good, because yes, they kind of fed one revenue stream in my company, but there's this healthier option of Tropicana juices and slice, and kids, sort of evolve from serving a rasna to your guests to a slice, or, so those were very interesting years, where one learned the mindset of people, learned how their lifestyles were, and what would it really take for them to shell out that extra buck for a more nutritious option. And of course, doing the market, I think that just kind of toughens you up. From Pepsi, I went to work with Bennett.
Okay.
So again, this was a small setup within Pepsi of non-carbonate beverages. Of course, I worked on brand Pepsi also eventually, but then, so it was a small setup within a large Pepsi, a roller Pepsi. Then I joined Bennett and Coleman. Somehow the media bugged me, started to rise again. I said I want to get back to doing something in media, and I think it was also a little accidental. It wasn't like pre-designed that I wanted to really move out.
Right.
But somebody from Bennett was in Delhi, and they were looking, and they said, why don't we catch up and chat? And what they spoke about sounded very interesting, because Bennett at that time had very few IPR properties. They used to have Filmfare Awards, and they had Miss India. They were the only two cash-making properties that Bennett had. So they wanted a person to come on board who understood brands and who could create properties, IPR properties for Bennett, which were monetizable and sustainable. So I was hired to join that vertical, to actually set up that entire vertical. Again, a small, non-existent vertical within the large world of Bennett, which was again interesting, because every property was like a brand on its own. And that is where I learned how to really work on a P&L, because every property had to deliver top line as well as a bottom line. And of course it was quite glamorous as well, because I used to be sitting with a Shah Rukh Khan and trying to negotiate a contract with him, and Hrithik Roshan. So I had my little bit of a glamour as well, plus hard work of actually bringing in the moolah to the company. And then I joined Radio Mirchi again, which was part of Bennett, which had a footprint of about 23 to 24 stations at that time. And radio being a very local medium, all the stations were again a brand on their own. So the whole effort was to generate properties and how to get people to start listening, to increase the listenership, to increase client spends on that medium, considering that television was so fragmented and so expensive, and trying to reach your message to a local community was much simpler and easier, more impactful through radio. So, and then I joined SABMiller.
Okay.
Again, it was, I think it's just kind of my career has just flowed, a natural course. I think somewhere the whole burning also started to happen. And also as you get older, your needs get very limited. And you start to wonder that, okay, I'm traveling so much, I'm earning so much, I'm, vanquishing so many people in a conference room, but to what end? And is my life really about a sales target or an appraisal by a boss or an increment? And what about my self-appraisal? And what am I really doing? What am I doing to myself first? And what is it that I'm going to do which will actually leave some sort of footprint? Now, of course, there are people who are doing much more work. But then I think at an individual level, if we all start saying that at least let me do my bit, collectively, we just might end up making a difference. So I said, okay, I really enjoyed reading about food and agriculture when I was preparing for my interview. And food is something I really love. I can't stop eating, and I don't think one should deprive yourself of food. But eating well, growing your own food, were things which seemed quite exciting. And again, I think I felt like I had learned fair amount through various jobs, and my learning had somewhere started to stagnate, because now it had all become about crisis management and less about innovative thinking or learning more or imbibing more or understanding more, So I decided to make a shift to something which was interesting, but something that I was ignorant about as such, which was agriculture. Of course, circumstances were quite, they had a role to play, because my husband's company, it is about, they make bio inputs for organic farming, and we live at a farm which is huge and which has actually not been exposed to chemicals for the last 22 years. So we spoke, and he said, he suggested, if we are doing the inputs, why don't you do the output? And let's work on developing a model farm for farmers where they can be brought in to see the processes that go into converting your soil to an organic and a more porous soil, and various processes of organic farming and things that you can grow, and how biodiversity can really encourage you to increase your yield versus just monocropping. So it started off as a model farm, and we decided to call it Kara Organics, more because it was Kavita and my husband's name is Ravi, so K-A-N-R, it was as proof as that. But then, of course, when I read up in Greek, it also means pure. So it all kind of fit very well. And from a model farm, I felt that, okay, if you're doing this, why don't, I start growing this category at least, which is something that I had learned over my past few jobs, building brands and growing a category and educating consumers, because I feel that's the best way to create stickiness in your consumers, when you have them buy into a brand because they believe in it, versus putting it up on a shelf as 1+1. So I thought that I saw a gaping hole in the world of organic foods, and I saw a lot of lack of awareness and a lot of misleading,
So what are the kind of products you are growing?
So we are now doing, it's mostly seasonal greens. It's actually seasonal greens, and at a given point in time, you will find at least 60 to 70 different kinds of greens, vegetables growing at the farm. And the whole idea being that, we have to move away from the usual spinach and the methis, and there is just so many more indigenous crops in India especially that one can explore, which could be healthier, easier to grow, and could be extremely good for your soil if you start working on a rotational cropping system.
So I was reading an article which said that Sikkim has become the first completely organic state.
Yes, Sikkim and Uttarakhand is also now on its way.
And what about some of the other states like Haryana and Punjab, which are really the cash crop states,
Yes.
or Andhra for that matter?
Unfortunately, Punjab has a very sad story. In fact, like I said, some time ago, that contamination of your soil is actually the bane for not just our 75% of chronic diseases come because of what we eat, but there's a lot of social chaos that has been created because of what we have done to the soil. So in Punjab, where the whole green revolution bit had started, while at the face of it, it seemed like it's increasing the yield of the food. It wasn't really increasing the yield.
It was messing up the soil.
It was just about, it was messing up the soil. And of course, when you tell a farmer that you're just supposed to grow corn and wheat instead of 50 other things, you're increasing the yield purely by acreage and not really getting a plant to sprout more. And of course, over a period of time, you kill the soil. So Punjab, so that is what happened, because a lot of farmers over 3-4 years lost their land because now that land is totally defunct, or they have incurred huge debts because there are seeds which are patented and which they have to buy. They have to use herbicides because their plants have become less resistant. The soils are becoming defunct, and at the end of the day, they have mounting debts, they have no land, and they're eventually committing suicide. If they're not committing suicide, the younger lot of the families are moving away and coming to the cities and looking for other jobs, which is creating more unemployment, and there's a rise in crime. So the whole issue, the whole issue in the society is also starting from how and what we are doing to the earth. So I think Punjab has a long way to go, and the change really has to happen at a ground level for sure. The consumers have to start understanding organic and start asking
how much time does it take for soil to be able to revive itself?
Usually 3 to 5 years, depending on the level of contamination. So which is why when you go in for certification, your first 3 years are under conversion, and there is thorough monitoring and supervision, and by the end of 3rd or the 4th year is when you get truly certified as organic. So it is a long process. It is a bit of an expensive process as well, and which is what we are doing at Kara now. While we are working with a lot of farmers to tell them that you will increase the life of your soil if you practice organic farming. We are also trying to work with certain policy makers where we are urging them to work on how they subsidize organic inputs, how they can help the farmer to tide over that setback in revenue he might face in the first 3 years of, in that transition period from conventional farming to organic farming, because that is actually a big deterrent for the farmer. That my yield will become less, I will make less money, and hence why should I move to organic? So it's a short-term view which is keeping him away from thinking long-term.
So, moving to one more question before I come into some more personal questions. You've mentioned that our body is our foundation and not our temple. Help me understand this.
Ashu, we work so hard on looking good, and we don't work hard enough to feel good. I think your body is not a temple. It is not something that you need to adulate and expect miracles from. It is something that you need to nourish. It's something that you need to really look after, because you could be chasing top lines and bottom lines, but if you're not healthy, the only thing that you will get to the fastest is a flat line.
Correct.
So if you're not healthy, I mean, it has an impact on everything, not just yourself, but your peripheral family, their emotional well-being, and it is something that we all need to wake up to and say that, I need to work on myself.
Yep. And yet I was reading an article last week which was talking about this global craze for getting fitter. And they are beginning to say that this is now getting too extreme and is going to start harming our bodies. So where is there some kind of a balance?
So fitter is a very misleading word, because a lot of people think fit means thin, or fit means size 1 or 0, and it does not mean that. Fit means that you are something that keeps you happy inside. I mean, your emotional happiness relies a lot on your physical well-being as well, and for us the ability to keep pushing ourselves longer. Our lifespans, I mean, there's science working on increasing our lifespans, right?
Yeah.
So if we are going to live till the age of 80, 90, I mean, I don't think we should be wanting to live on a wheelchair or on a bed. I mean, we may as well be walking and delivering and remain productive for as long as we can. And I think there is so much more to do and see, that it is, grossly unfair if we run out of steam too fast. So so fitter does not mean just looking good. It means you have to feel good as well.
I agree. Yeah. So moving on to now some more questions. One question I love to ask all my guests, which is, tell me a little bit about your biggest learning from some failures.
Well, fortunately, professionally, I think I've not been able to calibrate something as a biggest failure so far, but there have been failures, there have been disappointments. There have been personal setbacks as well, which, like I said in the beginning, that taught me a lot. But what I have really learned a few things from failures is that, firstly, owning and recognizing a failure is very important. And once you know that you have failed, you have to start working on how to unfail yourself. And very often we try to, we spend a lot of time trying to rectify that failure or try to look for excuses on who to pass the buck on, instead of really cutting our losses and moving on and actually just taking the learning out of failure. I mean, I think failure is your biggest revenue opportunity.
Correct.
And your highs from your wins you will not remember them as much as what you have learned from a failure. So yes, recognizing and owning your failure is what I have learned from some of my failures in time, before you start putting good money behind bad money. Secondly, you can bounce back. We are made in a certain manner where we find solutions. I think I often tell my friends and people that when God sends you a setback, He gives you the strength to deal with it as well.
Yes.
And it's just about you exploring that and trying to unearth that about yourself. And there is nothing that you can't tide over. I mean, if we can get over our parents when they pass away, there's nothing which is insurmountable.
That's so true. That's like the old phrase, "This too shall pass."
This too shall pass, and surely does. And if you don't learn, then you pass away with it, and if you learn then you sort of pass on. So yes, so that's a big learning that I've had from my parents.
So you've had a successful corporate career, you've had a successful entrepreneurial career. What is the secret of the success?
I think it's something which is now something that I live with quite literally these days. Mm-hmm. It's about listening to your gut. So in the past, there have been occasions where I've failed, where I did not listen to my gut. And there have been occasions where I've sort of achieved something because I've listened to my gut and combined that with, some semblance of strategy and made sense out of what I thought was workable. And today I actually tell people, listen to your gut. You know, detoxing the gut is a big fad these days. So you listen to the gut. So I think one is that I have listened to my gut. Two is that you have to always be open to learn. You know, the day you realize that you're learning, you have know everything. That is really your nemesis, because you really stop evolving and growing as an individual. So there is always something more to learn. And just giving an example from personal experience, you know, after I got out of my very hectic corporate life, I decided to have a baby at 44. And which was, you know, I mean, everybody said at 44 you can't, and it's, you know, difficult or whatever. And I said, no, you know, I mean, that's one part of life that I have so much to learn about motherhood and all that. And so I had a baby at 44, and the journey of motherhood over the last 2 years has been so much learning in so many ways, you know. Thirdly, you have to interact with people closely enough to gain some learning out of them. You know, when we work in teams, when we work in organizations, we work very empirically and we start treating people like commodities. Whereas I think that there is so much to learn when there's a slight personal touch as well. You learn from people. You learn what's driving them. You learn what is motivating them. You learn what is demotivating them. You know, you learn how to bring out skill sets in people. So that is only possible when you actually get to know the person as a human being and not as a manpower as part of your team. So I think working with people, willingness to learn, and desperately seeking good people to work for. I mean, for me, working for a good boss has always been very important, because you know, there is a reason why that person is my boss, and I think nothing can be more demotivating than not working for the right individual in an organization.
So Kavita, what an amazing journey you've had. I mean, you know, successful corporate career, successful farmer, if I can use the term, mother at 44. You know, you've been absolutely amazing, and I'm going to look forward to watching you rise and climb over the years. But thank you so much for coming to our podcast. I think your words of wisdom, you mentioned gut, and I've also said that listening to your gut is also something which leads to a lot of wisdom.
Yes, for sure.
So
that's what the Vedas tell us.
Absolutely.
I mean, Vedas spoke about the gut. And it's just
correct. So thank you very much again.
Thank you.
And great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You podcast. Be sure to visit tbcy.in to join the conversation, access show notes, and discover fantastic bonus content. You can follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Simply search for the Brand Called You. Thank you, and see you next week.